Hello everyone and welcome to BiteSize Mechanics. In this channel I aim to demonstrate fundamental and creative game mechanics using Unity and C# scripting. I want to show you how individual game mechanics work by themselves to give context on how they have their place in a more complex game system. If you want to hear more about game mechanics, suggest one in the comments and smash that sub button. So what I wanted to talk about today was how to control your animations with C#. For those of you that don't know, an animation in a game is when a movement is performed by a game object to give an aesthetic feel to the player but serves no mechanical purpose. There are animations made for different things, for example running, jumping and idle states, and the computer doesn't know when to perform these animations, so you have to link them to your mechanics and actually program the computer to say, I want the animation for running to play when my character controller is moving forward. So we have to actually tell the computer what to do. Now there are different aspects to controlling your animations and programming them. So for example, you can make the animation clip yourself, or you can download an animation clip from the site Mixamo. It really doesn't matter. Just as long as you have an animation clip to assign to a mechanic or something that is happening in Unity. Also, we can think about the variables we can assign to our Animator Controller. You would need a ball to tell the computer that the character controller is not grounded, therefore play the animation. Make sense? I've waffled on long enough, so let's get into Unity. So what you're looking at right now is a game object with a very simple character controller. You're able to move forwards and backwards, strafe left and right, and also aim with the mouse position using the camera. For the sake of this demonstration, I wanted to keep it very simple using only Unity shapes and no external imported models or anything like that. And this will be a great starting point which will make it very easy to demonstrate what we're going to do. Everything we're going to do from this point you should be able to do with any version of Unity. So the first thing we're going to do is you want to go down to your project window and you want to right click, create, and we want to create an animation clip. And we're going to call this clip idle. So this idle state will become our default animation state. So if we go over to the player in the hierarchy and then move over to the inspector, what we want to do is click add component and we want to add an animator to our player object. Next thing we want to do is we want to go back to our project window and right click and create an Animator Controller. For this one we're going to call it Player Animator. Now what you want to do is select your player object, go to your inspector and drag and drop the Player Animator Controller in the controller section. If we double click on our player animator, we can see a window comes up, and what you want to do is drag and drop your idle animation state into the window, and then as you can see it will automatically turn orange and create a transition from the entry point. So what's basically happened is once you've drag and dropped idle into your Animator Controller, it automatically creates a default animation state. Now what this means is it will always play from the time you start the scene. Unless you've programmed any parameters for your animations to play, the default will always play as long as nothing else is being triggered. So what we actually want to do is create the movements that we want for our animation to apply to our character. So you can double click on your animation clip and it will bring up the animation tab and you'll see a timeline. So once we click record on the left hand side, what this will essentially do is record everything that is happening to the game object at the playhead that the timeline is set. So if we press record and move our game object just a little bit down and then move over the timeline 1/10 of a second, and then we can move it up and then we can move it down a little bit, this will essentially play out as we've set it on the timeline. So what I've essentially gone for here is a slow motion moving up and down just to simulate the cube standing around doing nothing. Also, if we move over to the inspector for our idle animation clip, don't forget to click loop time. And what this essentially does is this will loop the animation over and over again as long as it's playing. If you don't want this animation to play over and over again, leave the box unchecked. So now as you can see we have a nice gentle rocking animation to simulate that our player is standing around doing nothing. But there's one problem. Seeing as this is our default animation state and we only have one animation state in our Animator Controller, the default is going to play all the time. So we need to make a running animation for when our character controller is moving forward. So we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to right click in our project window and create an animation clip, and we're going to call this one running. And then you want to just drag and drop that into your Animator Controller window. So we don't want to make this too complicated. Essentially, I've just adjusted the cube's rotation back and forth so we get a nice motion to simulate a cube running. That looks a lot like a cube would be running to me. So now that we have our animation in full, we can go to our Animator Controller and actually set some parameters for Unity to be able to know when to play the running animation state. So if we look on the left hand side of the Animator Controller, you'll see a plus symbol with a drop down menu. And this drop down menu shows a list of data types. And what we want to do is we want to create a bool. So let's call this bool is running. For those of you that don't know, a bool is simply a variable type that returns a true or false value. This approach will be very easy to code, it's very efficient, and it's very easy for the compiler to interpret. So now what we want to do is we want to make something called a transition. So if you right click on your default animation state and click make transition, an arrow will appear on your mouse position and you just drag it over to the running animation. But you don't always want the running animation to play. You want your animation to stop playing when your character stops moving. So we have to create another transition from the running animation back to the idle state. So if you remember the bool that we made earlier called is running, we're able to go to the inspector and set conditions for this transition. So the condition is if is running is true, then play the animation. And then if we go over to the transition that goes back to the idle animation, we want to do the same thing again but set the condition to false. So if is running is false, go back to the idle state. Also, don't forget that if you don't want an animation to be playing all the time from the time you trigger it, make sure you have the has exit time box checked in the inspector. This way Unity knows that your animation needs to stop playing at a certain point. And also, as I said before, don't forget to check the loop time box in the inspector for the actual animation clip. So now let's do some programming and write some code for Unity to decipher when to play the animations. I've opened up my character movement script, which allows my character to move around as it does. I'm going to attach all the code for these animations to my character controller. You can do this on any script. It doesn't have to be the way I've done it, but I'm doing it on this script so you can actually see what movements are happening when and where I'm applying them to certain animations. All it is some variables to control the horizontal speed, the vertical speed, and the mouse movement. So let's make some space at the top, and the first thing we have to do is reference our animator component from the game object that we want to animate. So we're going to type in animator, and we're going to store this information in a variable called animator, but you can call it whatever you want. Seeing as this is a private variable, we have to go down to the start method, type in animator equals get component, pointy brackets, reference the animator component, and close it off with some parentheses and a semicolon. So now that we have referenced our animator, we need to find a way for the bool that we made earlier to actually change based on what we're doing in the game. So if we make some space down here, we can start writing an if statement. So the controls are currently mapped to WASD for moving around. So we can use this to our advantage. It doesn't matter what parameters you set in your if statement. As long as the isRunning variable is true, then the running animation will play. So I'm going to type in if input.getKey parentheses keycode.w, so we can copy it over 3 more times and separate it with the OR symbol, and then replace the W with A, S, and D along the parameter. So once we have our parameters for our if statement, what we're going to do is again reference the animator and we're going to type in animator.setBall parentheses, and we're going to put some quotation marks in there. And in the quotation marks, you want to put down is running spelled exactly the way you spelt it in the parameters for the Animator Controller. Then you want to put a comma, and then you want to set the ball to true. And then you want to close it off with an else statement and copy and paste the animator set ball and just set it to false. This way you know that if the WASD keys aren't being pressed down, then the idle animation state will play. So if we save that and go back into Unity and click play, we can see that our idle animation state plays just as planned. And then when we start moving, the running animation plays beautifully. It's a bit slow off the mark, but it's there and it works. And if we stop, it goes right back to the idle animation state. Very cool. So I really hope that some of the techniques and methods I've demonstrated in the video prove useful. If you've been interested in a particular mechanic or concept, suggest one in the comments. Also hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content on game development, and it also really helps me out when you do so. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.